Hey, well, I'd like to welcome a special guest onto the show today. We first met in person 6 years ago, and I've met up with him regularly ever since at conferences because he's a prominent speaker about real estate investment of all kinds, including hardwood forests, which is what we're discussing today. He's been operating in Latin America for 25 years now. Welcome to GRE, Mike Cobb.
Keith, thanks a lot. Yeah, actually, a little bit longer than that now. The years keep slipping up, right? For 28 years, Keith, it's incredible.
Now, specifically with teak hardwood forests, that's a sector I believe you've been operating in continuously since 1999. Now, this is really an interesting program where in the past, hedge funds and wealthy investors only had access to things like this, but you have made this investment conducive such that individual investors at a pretty low price can own the land themselves in these quarter-acre parcels. The property deed is in their name with trees that grow on top of it.
Yep, that's exactly right. I think you hit on a couple really important points. One is that for whatever hundreds of years, only the uber wealthy, right, the hedge funds or the family offices or the really, really rich individuals could participate in forestry projects because it just costs so much money to buy the land, plant the trees, maintain the plantation over decades in many cases. And so it really was something that was a very, very specific product to a very small subset of extremely wealthy individuals. Well, back in the 1998, we read some articles about teak plantations and specifically about how Panama had passed a reforestation incentive that gave all kinds of tax breaks and incentives for people to come to Panama, purchase farmland or cattle pastures, right, that had been deforested and replant them in teak or mahogany, other species as well. We chose teak. Teak has a 25-year harvest cycle. And yes, in 1999, we planted our very first 100-acre teak plantation in Panama. It was an old cattle pasture that had kind of grown up into brush, and we were able to now turn it into a beautiful, beautiful forest that will be harvested in another 4 years, and then replanted again for the next harvest 25 years later. The other thing you said, Keith, that I think a lot of times people have to pay attention to is this is titled ownership. You have escritura publica, public title. It's basically the civil law equivalent of fee simple title. So you have title to the land. It's yours. They're your trees. And that gives folks a lot of peace of mind, right? They own the land, they own the trees.
And a reminder, because I own property in Panama, it can take 1 to 2 years to get that deed, to get that title. The process just simply works slower in Panama. So one will need to pack their patience there. But, Mike, as far as the appeal and the compelling why to invest in teak, one way I've described it in the past, Mike, is that with investing in something like teak trees, they grow. And therefore, investors can participate in both the value, perhaps that's on a board foot basis, and the volume at the same time. Now, coming from the residential real estate world like I do originally, that's just something that you have to wrap your mind around. It's a different paradigm. When I talk about how your investment grows in volume, the trees grow in size while it could also grow in value. And coming from the residential real estate world, it doesn't work that way. Your rental single family home doesn't naturally grow into a duplex while it might grow in value at the same time. So it's both value and volume here.
It really is. And I like how you've described it, right? That single family house never becomes a duplex, right? You will see rents increase over time, right? The rent you receive from a renter will go up over time, presumably, right? And the same thing does happen on the board foot price of the value of the lumber, right? So at the end of the day, we know that over the last 100 years, I mean, one of the nice things about teak timber specifically, there are many species. A lot of species have been thrown around recently. Fast-growing species do this, that, and the other thing. But teak has actually been farm raised for over 350 years, starting with the British in Southeast Asia. I mean, they came in and they planted the very first teak plantations, again, about 350 years ago. And so there's this incredibly long track record, this history of value in the lumber. And we know that over the last 100 years, teak lumber has gone up on average about 5.5% a year over 100 years. And so this is, again, a very long track record. It doesn't mean that the future is going to hold, but again, 100 years is a pretty long time to know that. And the other side of it, which is the part that I smile about, because this is the piece that is the fact that the trees do grow. I mean, physically, the trees grow and get bigger. And the really neat thing is trees don't care if there's a recession or an economic challenge or anything like that. They just simply continue to grow year in, year out. And so while the price of lumber, actually COVID spiked the price of lumber. I mean, and it's gone way up and it's come way back down. And I think, again, these are the kind of spikes where you say it's an average of 5.5% a year. Back in 2019 and 2020, I think teak lumber went up about 35-40%, right? Now it's flattened off, but again, if you look at it over any long period of time, these spikes way up, push those averages up. But the trees continue to grow right through COVID and recession, depression. It doesn't matter. So it's a great asset class because it's truly counter-cyclical to the market.
If you, the listener, the viewer, are thinking, could this investment ever be for me? Or what are some of the pros and cons? Mike brings up the fact that this is so uncorrelated with so many other things that you might be investing in, whether there's a global health crisis or a war in Europe or fluctuating mortgage interest rates. The trees don't care. They just continue to show up and grow. And when we talk about variety of trees, Mike, of course, different trees have different attributes and different values. I grew up doing one of my summers from college in forestry in north central Pennsylvania, and we would mark maple trees and oak trees and the more valuable black cherry trees. And you learn about the different attributes of them and the values attributed to them. But with teak, that has some very special properties, like the natural oils that are intrinsic in the wood as it grows that makes it fire and weather resistant. And for example, that's why teak wood is so popular in outdoor furniture. You can leave it outside and it holds up well against the elements. So just tell us more physically about that teak tree itself.
The hardness of the wood, that is the most prized and valuable attribute of teak. However, teak, because it grows in the tropics, can grow in very rainy areas. And in rainy areas, it'll grow much faster, but it won't grow as hard. Teak, the perfect teak requires about a 6 to 7 month rainy season and a 5 to 6 month dry season. And what makes the absolute best teak is a very clear differentiation. You've got rain for 6 or 7 months. You've got absolutely dry for 5 or 6 months. No rain, none, zero. And so when you have that type of environment, you get the perfect teak. You get the absolute hardest teak. In fact, they have to use diamond dust on their saw blades because it's that hard of a wood.
Wow.
But that's what gives it the ability to withstand rot, fungus. That's why they use it for furniture, as you said. They use it for boats and decking on yachts and things like that. They actually use it in the oil industry because the oils of the wood actually prevent sparking as well. So there are incredible industrial uses to teak that we don't even think about because it's kind of hidden, right? But teak has so many different uses because of these specific qualities. You were a geography student, right? This particular geography is perfect. And Panama, parts of Panama, not all of Panama, parts of Panama offer it. The Darien province is where our plantation is located. It's where the vast majority of the teak is actually grown in the country of Panama because it offers that 6-7 month heavy rainy season and then a 5 to 6 month perfectly dry season. And again, that's what creates the optimal characteristics of the teak wood that you then turn into lumber that makes the furniture and other items.
The Darien province in eastern Panama, a province so rugged and wild that's the reason that the Pan Am Highway is discontiguous. It does not bisect the Darien province of Panama.
That is correct. That's right. And we're just into the Darien province, but I have actually been to the end of the Pan American where it ends. It's right, and it just stops at a river, and then it's just jungle the rest of the way to Colombia. So yeah.
A major highway with a dead end there. Well, Mike and I are going to talk more about the timeline and what about the management? Is there any ongoing management of the forestry of the trees, and what are the costs and what are the returns? In the meantime, you can learn more at a great report that Mike put together for us at gremarketplace.com/teak, where you can learn more about it with the pro forma, and photos and details and a map and more. But Mike and I are coming back with more. This is Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. There is upward pressure on rents. And you can make this actionable at our sister website, gremarketplace.com. This is where you can leverage my industry contacts to get started with rental property. I own properties with a lot of these same providers across different U.S. states. Most of these properties, which I've actually never seen in person before. And how can I have the confidence to own rental property without ever having seen it? Well, for one thing, I partner with these turnkey real estate companies, which you can do as well. I'll see you over there at GRE Marketplace. Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking about teak tree investing. They don't grow so well in North America. So we're talking about particularly doing that in Panama. It's the opportunity for you to own individually titled quarter-acre parcels. But, you know, Mike, a lot of investors, real estate investors, they're used to getting monthly income streams from a tenant that rents out their single-family home or duplex or apartment building, but it doesn't quite work that way here. You told us about a 25-year harvest cycle, and maybe some listeners are wondering, oh, wait, do I have to wait 25 full years in order to get my return? So tell us more about that life cycle of the tree, including the management and the thinnings along the way.
In 25 years, you know, I'm either A, going to need the money and I'm going to be really glad I did this, or B, I'm not going to need the money and I'm going to be really glad I did this. and here I am in 22 years into this thing. And let me just say, I'm really, really glad we did this. We obviously don't want to get a paycheck. We strive to be paycheck free. But if we get a paycheck, that's every week or every 2 weeks. If we get a rent check, it's every month. If we get dividends from a stock, it might be every quarter or every year. So we have this cash flow mentality of 2 weeks to maybe 1 year in our heads. But 25 years is a cash flow cycle. Okay, it's a very powerful cash flow cycle, which is why the family offices and the super, super wealthy families have used timber for so long, because it's a 25-year cash flow cycle that stewards wealth into the future. Right? And it does it repeatedly. So if 25 years, I'm getting this first harvest, presumably I'm still alive in 4 years and I'll get it, right? Then in 25 more years, my children will get it. But if they're all screwed up and they spend all the money and they waste it, well, okay, they blew their 25 years, but the trees get replanted and then my grandchildren have another chance at it 25 years later and their children, right? And so this teak timber gives families the opportunity to steward wealth into the future on a 25-year cash flow cycle. Now, wouldn't bet the farm on it, of course, right? Because it's 25 years. But if you have money setting aside for things like, say, a trust, right? You can put it into a trust. I mean, so you can own it inside vehicles as well as individually, right? So all of us, and this is money I want to put for education for my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, forever, in perpetuity. This is the kind of wealth stewardship that timber, and in this case, teak timber, specifically affords an investor. It's why I did it. Let me just tell you, it's absolutely why I did it. I wanted money for myself in a few years, maybe, and I'll be happy. Like I said, I'm going to be happy I did it in a few years when we harvest, right? But then I want my children to have the money, my grandchildren to have their thing 25 more years on, so 50 years from now. And so while we talk about 25-year cash flow cycles, it's true. The thinnings do produce an income stream in years. 12 is a minimal income stream. 18 is your first kind of real income stream, and then 25 at the actual harvest. So those are your three: 12, 18, and 25. So you don't have to go the full 25, but your big payday truly is in year 25. And then you reinvest less than 1% of your proceeds, right, back in to get the get the trees replanted, and then it goes on again for another 25 years. So this is really important for people to understand. But again, for me and for the folks, and literally we have I think over 1,000 folks now who have decided to own one of these teak parcels, or in many cases multiples, right? So I think we're over 1,000 parcels delivered. And we've had to go out and buy more land and plant more trees. And Keith, you mentioned management. When I went back, this is back in 1998. I had to go to the Library of Congress. There was no Google, right? So I went to the Library of Congress and spent 2 days looking at books and magazines and periodicals and just on and reports, right, that I could get out about teak so that I could educate myself enough to go hire a management company. See, I didn't know very much, but I knew enough that I didn't want to do it myself, of course, but I needed to know enough to be able to interview management companies to ask the right questions to make sure they could do the job. And we actually hired a company called Heyo Forestal.
Yeah.
And they have done a tremendous job for the last 23 years. They had to prep the land in the year prior. Then we planted in 99. So over the last 23 years, they grew the baby seedlings, they cleaned the land, they planted them, they've maintained them. And it's this scientific management that's being done by a professional management company that produces the ultimate result, which is the highest quality teak. And that's what we want. We want the highest quality teak, of course. And from an investor standpoint, I think it's also important for folks to understand that we have aligned ourselves with our investors' interest. Our cut is 20% of the harvest proceeds, right? So our goal is to make the absolute most amount of money for our investors as possible because we get 20% of a higher number. So our goal is to make the number as high as possible so that we get 20% of the biggest number. But obviously that works with, for the investor's favor as well.
Truly aligned interests between you, the operator, and that individual investor. Yep. Okay, so with thinnings done by the management company, there is a small piece of income at year 12 and year 18, but it's at year 25 where there's that substantial payout and the cycle can begin once again.
Correct. Yes, correct.
A lot of people, they often haven't invested outside of residential real estate investing before. And then there's another group that hasn't invested outside of their own home nation before, especially outside of North America. So when it comes to this, foreign investing across an international line, is there anything specific that a new investor to that should think about or look out for, maybe that they had not been thinking about with their domestic investing?
Our development company's been around since 1996, and we developed a book called The Consumer Resource Guide. I know that you've made that available to folks on your website. Here it is, the Consumer Resource Guide. This is the kind of document that helps us coming out of our home country to do proper due diligence. And you mentioned earlier that sometimes it takes 1 to 2 years to get a title. I've actually seen it take longer than that. It's very bureaucratic. It's very cumbersome. And it does, I like you're saying, pack your patience. That's a good one. Pack your patience. The good news is that civil law is very different from common law. And that when you sign a contract, right, when that contract is signed and registered, it actually is the legally binding document. The title is almost superfluous at the end. It doesn't, I know it matters to us as coming out of North America and everyone's getting their titles, right? But that contract is truly the binding instrument for the transaction. And so even if you never got your title, you would have full legal recourse in a civil law society, which Panama is civil law, with the contract. And obviously the titles do come. They just take a while. The systems are very bureaucratic and time consuming, but you do get title to the property and those trees are yours. But there are a few cultural things that I think, kind of make us, a little bit, need to make us a little more conscientious about the transaction, very conscious during the process. And we also offer tours. One of the things that's fun is a couple times a year, we run a bunch of people down there, whoever signs up and wants to come, and we go out to the teak plantation. People can go see their trees, or if they're thinking about ownership of a parcel or parcels, they'll be alongside other folks usually who already have owned a parcel. They can see what's available, and it's neat to go there and physically walk in the forest, see the trees, and understand that these may be trees that you would own, and the next generation of trees would be for your next generation too.
And you and your company are there to help lead investors through, hold them by the hand, and really make it easy and approachable for people to get started. Sort of a concierge service is how I think of it.
And that's always been our philosophy, right? We've always been a service company. I'm sure you know Zig Ziglar and the sales training that he does. And one of my favorite mantras is one of his, and it's, if you help enough other people get what they want, you can have what you want. And so we've always put service first, and taking care of clients and hand holding the concierge side of things. That this is a big part. It's a huge part of who we are as a company, who we are as people, but also, we embody that in our corporate culture as well. So yeah, and the tours are fun. People come down. We do the teak, of course, then we go to the canal. Maybe I think we always go to the canal. We do some other stuff. It's tremendous, And the other thing I think people kind of get hung up on, and we haven't even talked about it, but actually ownership of a quarter acre of teak is under $7,000. I think it's $6,880. So just it's $6,880, and you own a quarter acre of property with the teak trees on it. And so we've made it very, very affordable, and it's a small bite, so that if people have other investments, and I hope you all have lots of other investments, right? But the teak can become one of the investments that you put into your portfolio, understanding that it is a long cycle cash flow, 25-year cash flow cycle, and it's the way to steward wealth into the future. We also, by the way, we bought an existing, it's actually 3, but we bought 3 contiguous 16, today they're 16 years old. They were 14 when we bought it, 16-year-old teak plantations. So if folks are saying, well, I'd like to get a little money out before 25 years, you can actually, yeah, right. You can own a 16-year-old quarter acre parcel that will harvest in 9 more years, and then be replanted and go into the 25-year cycles after that. So that's an option for folks who are looking for a little bit of cash flow sooner, but understand the power of generational wealth stewardship on a 25-year cash flow cycle after that.
Now, is that price going to vary based on whether someone buys some quarter acre parcels with newborns or saplings versus that 16-year-old hardstand?
Yeah. The 16-year-old teak is just under $20,000 for the quarter acre.
Okay.
The ultimate return, again, nobody knows the future, right? It's hard to predict, but it's impossible to predict. It's called what it is, right? But again, we've picked a timber that has a 300-year track record. It's got a 100-year pricing track record that we follow. So we've tried to be as conservative as possible in this sort of what I call predicting the future, right? But the price, today's price of teak, using the 5.5% increase and the volume of teak at a good rate. We take average timber that's good quality. We're not talking about the super giant trees with the highest end quality. No, good quality, average growth trees. A $7,000 baby teak parcel today turns into about $94,000 over 25 years. And a $20,000, I think it's just under 20, I think it's 18 and change, but call it $20,000 16-year-old parcel turns into that same $94,000, but over a 9-year period instead of a 25-year period. So it's basically the same internal rate of return. The IRR is about 11% in both cases, which is a tremendous IRR, right? And sometimes we kind of get again hung up on this 25 years, but my goodness, an IRR of 11% for 25 years, that's huge, right? I mean, that's $7,000 turning into about $94,000. So, again, small bite lets you get into it, but then huge numbers on the back end. And then it just, again, goes on and on, generation after generation after generation.
Now, we think about that internal rate of return, which is somewhat synonymous with how I think of a total rate of return. Is there any sort of management cost that's ongoing for that investor, or is it just pay for a parcel upfront one time?
The management fee includes property taxes, which is important. Obviously, you got to pay your property taxes. I think it's about $125 a year for the parcel. So I hate to use the word de minimis, but it's basically a de minimis management cost to maintain the parcel, because it's being Because again, if it was just a quarter acre, it would be outrageously expensive to manage it. But because our plantations are hundreds of acres, we get the economy of scale on 100 acres, and then everybody pays their quarter acre proportionate piece.
Oh, this is really affordable and approachable. It's almost like inflation hasn't hit Panama or something. And to make it clear,
not much.
Yeah. Well, for the listener, for the follower here, Mike and his company, there aren't people that are all just based in the United States and then just go down there and check on things in Latin America every once in a while. Your company has a presence in Latin America.
We've been down there since 1996. I lived in Nicaragua for 14 years, raised I took a 2-year-old daughter with my wife, and I took our 2-year-old daughter when we moved there. We had another little daughter. So I've lived overseas as an expat for 14 years. We have about 150 people in the company, and I think 140 of them live in Latin America. So it's and some are in Europe, and I guess Mexico's Latin America, but I'm thinking Central America. But yeah, I mean, we have a few in the United States, a couple in Europe, but the vast overwhelming majority of our folks are in the region, in the specific countries that we work in. Yeah, huge teams on the ground. I'm there all the time. I'm in Belize 8 to 10 times a month. I'm in Panama 6-8 times a year. Nicaragua probably 5-6 times a year. So yeah, we're there all the time, and we absolutely are making sure that what needs to get done gets done. But the other side of that, Keith, is when you hire really good people and you empower them to do their jobs, if again, you got to find the right people, but when you find the right people and empower them, you can really trust that they get the job done well. And they do. But, I'm sort of a Reagan guy. I mean, trust, but verify. So, we have all the checks and balances in place, of course, but that's that's been a winning formula for us, finding the right people, hiring the right people, and then preserving. And again, we have a lot of folks who've been with our company, 15, 20 years. We have some people who've been with our company all 26 years at this point. So great longevity with retention of team members as well.
Now, Mike travels so often. We're grateful that he was able to sit down with us in one place for a little while. Teak tree investing in Panama. Again, it's something where you're typically not going to get financing. However, they may have a payment plan at zero interest for you there on these parcels to help you out a little bit and really just make this approachable and open it up to a lot of people. We talked about the price for the parcels. We talked about the returns in the management, and that they do offer tours. If you want to learn more, you can get started at gremarketplace.com/teak. That's gremarketplace.com/TEAK. That's where you can get started with this. Mike, do you have any last thoughts at all about teak hardwood investing?
It's the old Chinese saying that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. So if you hadn't invested 20 years ago in timber and in teak, well, the next best time is today. And I am very, very happy I did it, 22 years ago now. And I hope that a lot of folks listening today will decide to get the information at least, right? Request the information, take a look at it, and see if this is the kind of investment that would be right for you and your families and your future generations.
And as we learned, of course, you can buy new plantations now, or you can kind of buy time and buy ones that have already matured for 16 years as well. So there is an option there. Mike, this has really been fascinating to talk about. Thanks so much for coming on to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. Lots of fun, Keith.